It's that time of the week. It's time to find out who the biggest planks are. That's right. It's Talk Radio TV's Plank of the Week. And I'm delighted to say we've got a bit of a first coming up this week because we've only ever done Plank of the Week with 2 men and 1 woman. We've done it with 3 men. We've never done it with 2 women and 1 man. Now, I know that might sound a bit of a weird introduction, but I think it's time to admit that I have, for the first time, 2 women with me, which is going to be a very different vibe, I think. Emma Webb, who's done it many times, and Sophie Corcoran here for the first time. Welcome to Plank of the Week. Thank you for coming. And there's been an awful lot of plankery going on, Emma, hasn't there? So do you want to kick us off with your first nomination?
I can't believe you assumed my gender, Mike.
I know. It's not good, is it? It's not a good start.
My first nomination is a joint nomination in the confectionery industry.
Yes.
The first of the 2 is Chocolonely, a Dutch company that have released or are releasing through Waitrose this series of chocolate bars with injustice, inequality and inhuman written on them.
Right. Is the idea that if you eat the injustice that it disappears?
Well, the idea is that they're releasing these in a box. I think the series is called something like Conversations, something to that effect.
Why don't you just make a bar of fruit and nut and be happy with it?
This company it has, from the very beginning, been woke. So I used to buy these chocolate bars in Holland when they weren't available in the UK.
Right.
And I don't know if they've changed their packaging now, but on the inside they gave this explanation of why their chocolate bars were carved up with all of these unequal pieces. And it was supposed to symbolise inequality within the chocolate industry. And the bar itself,
I mean, they're really thinking too much.
The company is called Chocolonely because it's lonely fighting against injustice within the chocolate industry. And this company have vowed to eradicate slavery from their production by 2025. We're not there yet.
It's not easy to eradicate slavery.
And so they've been called out on the fact that actually, whilst they're criticising all of these other companies for being unethical, they are participating in the same supply chains. They say that it's justified because they want to work with the big dogs in order to try and change the industry. But what it actually just looks like is that they are trying to, but it's marketing essentially. Yes. They're trying to virtue signal as a way of marketing and selling their chocolate as being different from the other ethical manufacturers. And this was in the same week as the story that everyone will have heard of, which is M&S deciding to axe midget from midget gems because they believe, and changing it to mini gems, even though midget, mini.
Well, it's funny because I've been, ever since that day when that story broke, I was asking people to take pictures of the midget gems that they could find in various shops because apparently there's lots of different shops that do sell them. So while M&S apparently has withdrawn them from what we could gather, because we tried to send somebody out to buy some, couldn't find any, all the other supermarkets have got various different versions of them and they're still called midget gems. So it's only M&S, I think, that are actually now saying you can't call it that.
It's a genre of sweet, like black bullets.
Yes.
Or as I think it was Brendan O'Neill pointed out that crackers could be offensive because it's a slur against
Well, you were
white
saying ginger nuts are quite offensive to people with red hair.
Justice.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, you might have to chat, but it's so ridiculous, isn't it?
I just don't get this. It's chocolate. Why does anyone think that chocolate... there's all of this injustice in the world. If a chocolate bar could have solved it, I would have done it by now. I don't get how they come up with all this nonsense.
I think people just... It's the same with Ben and Jerry's, that, people just make chocolate. Yeah. Make ice cream.
All I want is a bar of chocolate.
If in Ben and Jerry's case, try not to make ice cream with migrant labour, which you're paying below minimum wage.
It always appears that they've got... It's almost like they've got something to hide, like the lady does protest too much. If these companies are going so out of their way to signal their virtue, even though these companies are in many ways guilty of various unethical things, you can think of almost any of these big companies that there are things that they do that are not exactly ethical, but it looks so cynical because they're using it clearly as a marketing ploy. Like Chocolonely made this advent calendar where they left out some chocolates and it was supposed to be symbolic of to remind people about starvation.
I think they certainly got a mention on Plank of the Week just before Christmas for that. Unbelievable.
I just don't get why people don't just stick to chocolate.
Well, I mean, maybe they shouldn't make quite so much chocolate because one of my pet hates is going into any shop that sells chocolate and there's so much of it. And you're kind of going, I don't really think we need 25 different versions of Kit Kat, do we? Do you need to do a new sort of bubble gum flavour of Kit Kat? Just get Kit Kat. Isn't that enough?
The problem is that Chocolonely's chocolate is really rather nice.
Is it good?
So I am still going to keep buying it.
Right.
But I think that, it's a point that was made to me by someone else that, if you want to make a point about inequality in the chocolate industry, maybe we should demonstrate that inequality by voting with our wallets and not buying Chocolonely.
Well, you could do that, but obviously you're not going to join in with that particular boycott.
No, it's really good. It's really good chocolate.
I'm a big fan of chocolate. I've never tried it. I may have to. I can't believe you haven't brought any in.
I did try.
Did you?
I did actually.
Have they sold out? Is that what's happened?
Oh, probably the marketing ploys
They've left it off the shelves to show that it's lonely. There's no one there.
Unbelievable. So, Sophie, welcome to Plank of the Week, as I say.
Thank
You expressed an interest in coming here. So let's see, what's your first nomination?
So my first nomination is Barry Gardiner. He's the Labour MP who has accepted over £500,000 in donation from a Chinese agent who is a spy for the Chinese Communist Party, Christine Lee.
Yes.
He claimed that they'd spoken politics, but he didn't give her any political gain. So, I've only told her a couple secrets, nothing much.
Right.
And then he's also, up until I think it was his Thursday, employed her son as his diary manager. And the thing is, it's a massive, massive security breach. And
you would think. But then apparently it's not illegal. It's not against the rules of the House of Commons to take that amount of money from somebody who appears to be a lobbyist.
No, but my question about this is he's took over £500,000 from this Chinese friendly, lovely spy that he claims was to be for his staffing costs. So then my question is, why has he then gone and claimed £150,000 from the taxpayer for his staffing costs?
It's a very good question. And what exactly is he doing?
Money for it.
But what's he doing? I've seen a picture of his house over the weekend, which looks something akin to Buckingham Palace, which certainly doesn't look like the sort of house you'd be able to afford to buy on 80 grand a year as an MP. And it seems remarkable, doesn't it? Greg Hands, actually, the Tory MP, said that he's now concerned because he was in various meetings with Barry, Beijing Barry, as he's now known, about things like trade deals with China. And this guy was sitting in there getting confidential and presumably, very, very private information from government about what the trade deal with China was going to be like. And presumably he was telling her.
Where are all the Tory sleaze people now complaining about this? Because it's the same thing with the whole situation around David Cameron. The lines are so blurred when it comes to lobbying. What is lobbying? What is spying?
Yeah.
What money is acceptable to take? What isn't? And all of the people who were so loud about Tory sleaze aren't saying anything about this.
You can see this though, because I think it was what's his name? The really annoying one that went on LBC. Richard Bergen. He went on there and refused.
The comedy MP.
Yes, he refused to say that. He refused to say about China and their genocide. And he was backing them. They shut down the COVID lab leak theory very quickly, which health officials have said is a possibility. And now, all of a sudden, magically, they're being, the Labour Party are being funded by the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, you think Keir Starmer might have been interested in running some kind of internal investigation, but nobody seems to want to do anything.
The thing is,
because the Labour Party have taken some of the money as well, haven't they?
The Labour Party harassed Owen Paterson out of his job for sleaze. Meanwhile, Beijing Barry's over there cozying it up with the Chinese.
Doesn't seem right, does it?
It's sleaze.
But apparently...
And yet it doesn't seem surprising at all.
It really doesn't. And Barry Gardiner has been a kind of, there or thereabouts shadow minister for all sorts of different departments. And so if he's known this woman for several years, which appears to be true, but she's not just friends with Barry Gardiner, she seems to have been quite good friends with David Cameron.
And Ed
she seems to have been quite good. She's given some money to Ed Davey.
She's a very friendly lady.
But I mean, what I did say at the beginning of this whole scandal is if you are a Chinese agent, is Barry Gardiner really the greatest target you could achieve?
And,
can you imagine if on the phone to Beijing, it's great, we've got Barry Gardiner.
He suggests that maybe the CCP's intelligence network isn't quite what it's cracked up to be.
He had no idea, but she's in almost every single photograph in the Chinese Communist
Party. Well, she's not hiding it, is she?
In a circle, no, it was obvious.
She's been given an award, I think she's given an award by Theresa May for something or other. She's got a law firm in the Midlands, which I presume her husband is also involved with as well. And it's not, talk about hiding in plain sight. I mean, if everybody knows she's a spy, why is she still here? Is a question that was asked by Ian Duncan Smith. Why is she not been kicked out of the country?
True.
And MI5 seem to think it's better to know who they are. So we just let them operate. And then...
there is some credence in that, because if they are operating in broad daylight, then I guess it's the same with when the security services keep an eye on certain terrorists. There is a time to strike and a time that it's not necessarily advantageous to, because they can lead you to others.
Yes.
But this does raise serious questions about because we had all of this discussion around Huawei, around Chinese spying, Chinese investment, Chinese influence in the UK, in the property market, things like that. It seems absurd that this could be taking place and be allowed to continue taking place.
But for the Olympics now, I think it's a few countries.
The Beijing Olympics is like 2 weeks, isn't it?
Have been told to not take their phones or their laptops to Beijing because of cybersecurity threats and hacking and spying from the Chinese. The Olympians have been told that. So why aren't our parliamentarians? Why aren't they staying away?
We need to be decoupling ourselves rapidly from anything Chinese.
Yes.
Why has it taken so long? We know that China are a threat.
But the trouble is you can't, because they're into so much here. They're into energy companies that provide energy to this country. They're into every single academic institution in the land.
Yeah.
Almost every chair of professorialship is owned by the Chinese, and they're into every single kind of area of our everyday lives. And so I think uncoupling is way past a choice that we can even make.
Well, possibly, but we still have to. We've got to find a way to do it. And I think, some great research has been done by, people like Radimir Tylcott, who's, looked into their influence within universities.
Of course, there's a lot of people that think that...
they fund a lot of your Oxford and Cambridge, don't they?
Mine?
Your alma mater.
That's a bit unfair, singling her out as the sole representative of Oxbridge.
They fund
I'm the node in the CCP network.
Yes, you are.
Why haven't they been giving me a ring?
They fund a massive part of Oxford and Cambridge, and they're our top universities. So how much do China have influence over our best institutions?
Well, all of those institutions, all the sort of what you might call traditional universities, are completely riddled with Chinese money.
Funded,
unbelievable.
They're extraordinary at projecting their power in so many ways, and not just here, but all across Europe and across the New Silk Road and everything.
Utterly shameless.
Well, they've now got Afghanistan as well. It would seem. Anyway, I mean, there are those who think that this was all a ruse put up by Boris Johnson to deflect everybody away from Partygate, which of course hasn't worked, because only literally an hour before we started filming, Boris Johnson has got himself back onto Plank of the Week because he was interviewed again about what happened that fateful day in May 2020 when he had what he thought was a work event, because Dominic Cummings came out last night and said, well, I can categorically tell you that I told him it wasn't a work event. It shouldn't have been going ahead. He said it should, and that's why it did go ahead, and there's no way that he didn't lie to Parliament. He's come out and basically said, in his words, nobody told me that the number 10 garden party during lockdown was against the rules.
You wrote the rules, you should know.
Well, wouldn't you think he would know the rules? Wouldn't you imagine that he would know the rules?
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't get now why the media are coming here and saying that Dominic Cummings is a saint and a beacon of truth, and every single word that comes out of his mouth is, to the letter, when they spent years and years calling that man a liar.
Yeah, I don't know.
Why do you trust him now?
I don't know why they suddenly have switched allegiance.
No, a second he says that about Boris,
he's the cynical
of truth.
Really? I mean,
it's almost as if it's politically motivated.
I mean, the thing is, the trouble is, you would, unfortunately, I mean, it's why Keir Starmer looks virtuous against Boris Johnson, because anybody up against Boris Johnson looks like they're telling the truth. Because as somebody said to me, if he was such an inveterate liar, why isn't he better at it? Because he's not very good at it.
Unfortunately, he could tell the truth and it would sound like a lie.
Well, very possibly so. But how about this? This is another quote from him, right? I'm saying categorically that nobody told me, nobody said this was something that was against the rules, doing something that wasn't a work event, because frankly, I can't imagine why it would have gone ahead or it would have been allowed to go ahead if it was against the rules. So he's effectively saying, well, it must have been not against the rules, otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
I can imagine why it would have happened, because they thought they were above the rules.
Well, also, yeah, they didn't care.
All of the people who got in trouble for breaking the rules at any point during coronavirus should just be pardoned.
Yes.
Because of this. Because if the Prime Minister can use that excuse, because...
I didn't know it was against the rules.
And fair enough, the rules were unclear.
Yeah.
The rules were not these were not... rules, this was not legislation that should have ever been able to be imposed by any government. They were unclear. It was almost impossible to follow them to the letter. The government themselves have proven that they weren't able to follow their own rules. They should just, anybody that has suffered as a result of having broken these rules through fines or anything like that, they should have reparations.
And there's plenty of them. There was a woman in London, wasn't there, who was fined for the exact same day, I think, having a party in Hackney or somewhere. She was fined 12 grand.
But the thing is, it's not even just Boris and these parties. I think It was about 1,800 students have been fined for breaking the COVID rules, some of them for up to £10,000. They've claimed about £170,000, I think, roughly in total for all of the collective fines for students have done. These are students, and I'm a student, that own nothing. We are poor as you can be, and they're fining us £10,000 for having one extra person in your flat. That completely ruins someone's life. Meanwhile, the number of members of parliament that are on £80,000 salaries, how many of them have been fined?
Yeah, well, none of them. And how many of them actually got sick after all these parties are down the street? None of them.
So why are we holding students to a higher standard?
That's the thing that really riles, is that you have to ask yourself, why was it that they broke the rules in this way? Because it suggests that they didn't think that the risk to them personally was sufficient to justify them being a bit more careful. Meanwhile, they were terrifying the rest of the population into submission.
And one of the events that's been overtaken by other events is Kate Josephs at the end of last week, who was the head of the COVID task force, who had a leaving party in December of 2021, I think it was, because she was going back to work at Sheffield City Council. And you go, well, and you're the head of the COVID task force. You're seeing all the data. You're having an indoor party in your office with loads of people and some drink. Now, I don't give a stuff if people want to have a party, but it is complete hypocrisy. And it shows that even the leader of the COVID task force knew it wasn't dangerous.
It's the fact that they were engendering so much fear in the population and doing things like not allowing people to see their loved ones while they were dying in hospital, not allowing people to see elderly relatives, like my grandmother who's in her 90s, who's in a care home. You know, she is towards the end of her life. I'm sure she would rather have a cuddle from her son than to be locked inside for her safety at the end of her life.
Absolutely.
So they're engendering all of this fear within the population, but clearly are not frightened enough themselves that they feel that they, ought to take even, when assessing their own risk and behaving according to their own
They've got all
assessment.
of the data in the world that they could possibly have coming into their offices minute by minute. They know everything. So the fact that they weren't scared shows you that there is not really anything to be scared about anymore. So I think that's the biggest thing we've got to take away from this Partygate. We can get riled up in the hypocrisy, we can call for people to resign, we can be angry, but at the end of the day, we need to take away the fact that they were not scared when they had all the data. So it's about time all of us learn to live our lives and stop living in fear, because they never were. And we can talk about all of the petty stuff, or we can make a decision to live our lives properly now and get this whole situation over with.
When you talk about the cost-benefit analysis of all of the public health policies versus the damage that those public health policies have caused, their behaviour and breaking the rules in this way suggests again that in that cost-benefit analysis, the cost is so much higher than any benefit that we got.
And we're finding that out. And we're finding that out more and more and more as we look into the health service, into the school system, into the NHS in general.
The school system one's really important to me, obviously, because I was a sixth former during the pandemic, and we literally sat there and watched our futures be ripped away from us in front of our eyes. And it was like there was nothing we can do. And at the end of the day, this pandemic is going to be over. The damage that they've done to my generation and all of our lives will last for the rest of our lives.
I know.
So
it's a shocking state of affairs. But that's why we've been saying all the things we've been saying. It's very nice that at Talk Radio we've now been proved right. That's basically, I might as well say it now. We got it right long before anybody else did.
It doesn't feel as good to be right as I'd hoped.
Oh, it's always good to be right. Listen, well, I don't know what it's like not to be right, so it's all the only thing I've ever had. Emma, who's your second nomination?
Very much in the same vein, I'm going to nominate Khalid Mahmood, MP, for his absolutely absurd, ridiculous interview that he did with Christo at the weekend on Sunday.
Christo, who I think he might be on Plank of the Week next week, actually.
This interview was so absurd, and I was completely gobsmacked. Even thinking about it, I'm still gobsmacked. But afterwards, we went into a break, and I just sort of sat there in complete, astonishment.
Disbelief.
Total disbelief, because he was so inconsistent with his arguments, and Christo quite easily demolished him. One of the points was relating to Barry Gardiner, that he was, on the one hand, calling for Boris to resign before Sue Gray's findings, but on the other hand wasn't doing the same for individuals in his own party who've been caught doing naughty things. And also he was, when he was talking about the definition of what a party is, and he was defining a party by how much alcohol is consumed. So Boris Johnson can't have wine and cheese for his lunch, but it's okay for Keir Starmer to have a beer because that's not a party because it's just one beer and he's standing on his own. But the way that he was trying to piece together this argument was so profoundly weak and flimsy that I just have to nominate him as a plank, because this is not the calibre of MPs that we deserve.
We do have an awful lot of MPs who are very, very distinctly average, I'm afraid.
This was distinctly below average, because he was continuing to double down in this argument, and it was quite clear, you know, where this was going and how Christo was going to respond to it. And he just walked right into it, and he didn't seem to see the inconsistencies in his own arguments.
No.
And again, like I say, trying to define a party as being dependent on how much alcohol is consumed, as if parties have never happened in the Middle East without, you know, booze or wine and cheese and so on. The whole thing was just so completely absurd that I thought, I really, truly cannot believe that this... And this is coming after all of the shenanigans over the last 2 years. I still cannot believe that we have an MP who can make arguments this week on national radio.
I know. There's an awful lot of them, though. I mean, I'll never forget some of the people that I interviewed when we were down in the Tent of Shame that year when nothing was happening, and every single time they would come in and it would just be like, really?
They never cease to amaze.
Yeah. Is that really what you think? It was quite incredible. Sophie, who's your second?
Well, it links on beautifully to what Emma just said there. My second is actually Keir Starmer.
Yes.
For what we just went over. So he has been calling relentlessly for Boris to resign over Partygate.
Unfit to lead.
However, he himself seems to have forgotten that he was caught on the 30th of April last year in a gathering indoors with Mary Foy, who is the MP for Durham.
Wasn't it in your neck of the woods up in Durham?
Yeah, and a number of other people inside having a booze up and a takeaway. Now, people are saying that, oh, there's no comparison. Well, it kind of is, because they both claimed that they were at work and then all of a sudden booze showed up. To my lovely Labour followers, if you did a quick Google, you will be astonished and very glad to find out that in April, the lockdown restrictions were no indoor gatherings. So we have Boris, who is outside, socially distanced, having a bit of wine and cheese, claimed he was at work. Keir was indoors, they were on top of each other, and they were having a takeaway. So you can compare the two. The only difference between the two right now that stands is that Boris has come out and apologised, whereas Keir has doubled down and decided not to.
Yes, well, he says he doesn't need to apologise, which is unusual for a politician, because normally they do apologise even when they don't mean it.
They're so annoying because they keep coming out here, and this is what really winding me up about Labour Party right now. They're coming out here and bashing Boris with these sticks of all these horrendous, heartbreaking stories of laws that they voted for.
Yes.
They voted for them, so you're coming out, oh, all these people dying alone. You wanted that.
That was another thing that Khalid Mahmood said, was he thought in hindsight that the restrictions weren't any good, but then when questioned on why he voted with them again, it's, you know,
just a bunch
team
of
captain hindsight.
Also, they would have locked people down for longer. They would have locked people down.
Yeah, they wanted a policy of harder, faster, longer.
Ways. Yeah, exactly.
And they call for Boris to resign. They call for anybody to resign at a drop hat. Call for Boris to resign for breaking the rules, but not Keir. Call for Owen Paterson to resign, but not old Beijing Barry lapping it up with the Chinese over there. Where is the consistency?
This is a really serious problem, because it's Keir Starmer and other, Angela Rayner, for example, they want Labour to be seen as a government in waiting. But actually, on a serious note, their inability to string together strong arguments, to not contradict themselves, to not seem completely cynical, just projects to the public that Labour are not an honest party, that they're not acting in good faith. And so whilst, you know, obviously the Conservatives are going down in the polls, probably because of all of the Tory sleaze, and everyone's talking about how Boris is dishonest and so on a really fundamental level, the Labour Party comes across as being fundamentally dishonest, because they seem to be incapable of acting in good faith.
Well, I was just, funnily enough, checking back on Keir Starmer's Twitter over the last couple of days, because he hasn't yet ever tweeted about Barry Gardiner or China.
No.
We talked about that.
And they went on the BBC the other day, and she managed to avoid that as well.
It doesn't cross his path whatsoever. He has nothing to say
I see
about
them
it.
defending it. They put MPs out there, the likes of West Street, in defending them, breaking the rules or being hypocrites. And the problem is, the biggest issue we have in this country, and the reason why things like Partygate were able to happen, is because Labour are so utterly useless.
They are useless.
It does not matter what the Conservatives do because they know they're going to win. And
the other thing that's interesting.
Labour don't do nothing. They can call in investigations to wallpaper and parties, but when it comes to standing up to the COVID restrictions, they're not there. They're sitting on the fence. When it comes to grooming gangs, not there, sitting on the fence. Immigration, not there, sitting on the fence. So they are just completely a massive waste of space.
I had Graham Stringer on because they've also started putting out Labour MPs who are starting to sound a little bit more electable, because they're kind of moving away from all the trans madness and all the other kind of identity politics. But I got Graham Stringer, who sounded quite good until I said to him, what exactly would Keir Starmer do about the migrant crossings? What would he do about that? What's his policy on that? And he just started sort of stumbling and bumbling around because he didn't know. Because there isn't any policy except for let's let everybody come.
It's unintelligent opposition. They've got no imagination. The only thing they can think is to say more.
He makes me laugh because he somehow, by miracle, manages to see what the public want and do the opposite.
Yeah.
So massive migrant crisis. What does he come and do? Go wheels in old Yvette Cooper, who's standing there looking like the cat out of Tom and Jerry with a "Let 'em all in" sign or whatever it was. And then when a million people are signing a signature on old Tony Blair on his old good BBC patriotic speech, which, by the way, Labour and patriotic don't belong in the same sentence.
No.
But he comes on and says, I think Tony Blair's a great man and he deserves his knighthood. I mean, what is he doing?
Yeah, even the people in the Labour Party don't agree with that.
Exactly. He's just
but the other thing that's interesting is I was listening to Professor John Curtis the other day, who said that actually Labour's poll rating is no higher than it was the same time last year. The fact that the Tories have lost ground on them is entirely down to the Tories and people who are possibly going to vote in another direction and maybe go to reform or something. But Labour's vote hasn't actually gone up. So they haven't done anything brilliant. It's not as though Starmer's gone, look at me, I'm really popular now. It's just everybody else has kind of fallen away.
Yeah, they've not decided they're going to vote for Labour as a result of this. They've just decided they're not going to vote at all.
They catch up in the polls and you think, well, 11 years in, you should be winning these important by-elections and they're not doing it.
Exactly right.
So, this government has been utterly catastrophic. They should be winning by a country mile, but they're not. And that is a poor reflection on them, really.
I think it is, absolutely right. I'm afraid I'm going to go with Harry and Meghan with my second nomination. And I know that might elicit some sighs. But, I mean, every week, they ended up winning it last year, Plank of the Year. They had way far and away more votes than anybody else. But they don't have to be in it every week, but they put themselves in it every week. This week alone, Prince Harry has decided that despite the fact that he's no longer a member of the royal family, he wants to be treated like one. He wants to come to the UK, which apparently is a very dangerous country, despite the fact that he lives in Los Angeles, or just north of Los Angeles, one of the most dangerous cities in the entire world, where you're likely to get shot literally walking down Santa Monica Boulevard for no other reason than you happen to be shot because somebody shot you out of a moving car. But apparently they don't feel safe coming here with their children, and so he would like to pay personally for the Metropolitan Police to protect them. How bleeding arrogant can you get?
It's not how it works.
It really isn't. You don't just turn up and go, right, I want 25 police officers to protect me and my wife and my kids round the clock. I don't mind paying them. It's the most absurd and kind of really privileged and entitled way to behave that you think you can just buy everything. It's a very American thing, actually. I lived there for 10 years, and rich Americans think they can just come to Britain and buy it and go, right, well, what do you mean I can't get served at 10 o'clock at night? I'll give you 100 quid and you give me a sandwich. That's kind of it's kind of the ugly American mentality. It's hard to believe. And then meanwhile, she has taken Amal Rajan to task and has complained to the BBC. And he was trying to do something nice for her because Amal Rajan tends to be on Meghan Markle's side. But apparently he said that she had misled the court, which she actually admitted to doing. She's now complained to the BBC that was wrong. So I'm afraid, they're in there. They're not going to win it maybe this week, but they've got to be in there.
They can't do anything without digging themselves further down into the hole.
No.
I don't know what they thought that this was going to do, whether they thought this was going to play well with the public. I don't imagine that they do anything without PR in mind.
Right.
But it seems
he has got
again
a book to sell, but it doesn't sound to me like he's selling to the right people.
It seems again though like that it's another stick to beat the UK with, another stick to beat the British people with, to say, look how hard done by I am that you won't allow me to have police protection for my family. And now, in some ways, I do understand it because, he has a particular status that he has inherited, and there's not really very much you can do about that.
Yeah.
But pay for your security yourself. You've done all of
he's
these...
offering to do it, but the thing is, you can't just order the police. You can't
buy the Metropolitan Police. That is just simply not how it works.
And it seems to me that he's only annoyed because if he does hire private security, they're not allowed to have guns. Well, okay, I don't think you really need to have
one else
security
has
with guns.
here in the country
and he
anyway.
doesn't have Metropolitan Police protection in America. So why does he need it here? You know, is he not as much at danger in America as he is here? Are there really more people in Britain that want to do him harm? I don't think so.
I just think these two are just so privileged that it just sums up 2020 era perfectly, that the most privileged people in this country are lecturing all of us on privilege, first of all.
Yeah.
And it just comes at such an awful time. The Queen has literally lost her husband. You've got Prince Andrew's, her favourite son, has been stripped of all his titles.
The worst thing about Prince Andrew that I discovered this week was that he has...
cuddly toys.
Cuddly toys in the bed, but also a pillow with Daddy written on it.
Oh, God.
I mean, I'm sorry.
They're just so irritating.
What were the cuddly toys again?
I can't remember, but they had weird names.
I don't even want to know.
They had weird names. I don't want to know why he has cuddly toys on his bed. I just don't
But
want to
what
go
I mean,
there.
she's having such a difficult time in what is her Jubilee. Her Jubilee officially is actually on my birthday. In a year that should be momentous and full of celebration. And she needs her family to support her with the loss of her husband, and all they are doing is making it worse. And for what reason?
Yeah.
What
and
are
they've
they
chosen the Jubilee?
Really pleased to see that she's not giving either Andrew or Harry the Queen's Jubilee medal, which is brilliant. It's just a fantastically kind of understated slap, isn't it?
And I didn't think I could love the Queen more.
I know, isn't it brilliant?
Yeah.
Anyway, we're probably going to run out of time soon, so we better have your third nominee.
The NHS,
Excellent.
on behalf of all companies and institutions that are firing the unvaccinated or discriminating against them.
Yes.
We're coming up to the point now where the NHS are going to be getting rid of their unvaccinated staff, despite the fact that they have a staffing shortage anyway. And they also, because of the new pandemic, shall we call it? It's the evidence seems to suggest that actually it's not because the staff are getting sick; it's just because of the isolation rules. So they're even less staff than normal, and that's what's creating the current crisis in the NHS. So even despite this multitude of problems, they are still going to fire their unvaccinated staff in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, next couple of weeks, I think.
So I wanted to nominate them, but on behalf of other companies. I know that you were speaking earlier to Laura Dodsworth about companies like Ocado that are discriminating against their workers with sick pay, not offering them the same sick pay as vaccinated workers. And it's clearly a measure intended to coerce those individuals into having the vaccine, despite the fact that Omicron, it seems, evades the benefits when it comes to transmission with the vaccine, as that doctor pointed out when he was talking to Sajid Javid. Right. So, the NHS, on behalf of all of these companies, I don't think it's quite fair to say that they're planks. I actually think that this is grossly unethical and a little bit evil.
Well, this is why plank is a great word, because it sort of covers everything from evil down to just a bit stupid.
To the flexible end of being a plank.
I don't get the point of this, though, because the government have made us give up our lives for the last 2 years to protect the NHS, and they're going to purposefully overwhelm it by sacking all of the staff. So
this is why,
what was all of our work
again,
for?
it proves
Why
that what
did
they
we do
wanted to achieve was, one, not really the reason they were doing it at all, and this idea that they were going to overwhelm. The NHS was never overwhelmed, even at the very height.
Education and my future for nothing.
And my recent experience as well of the NHS, I am so appalled by how badly it functions. I used to be one of the people who wasn't necessarily on side with those who wanted to reform the NHS. I didn't quite get the arguments. Now that I've looked into it more, thought about it more, had a little bit more experience of the NHS, I'm horrified by how it runs. People will be dying because of how completely incompetent. And it's not because of the staff. It's not because the staff aren't well-meaning. Many of these staff members, even including the ones who are unvaccinated, these are people who've gone into this as a vocation. They care about the people that they're caring for.
And they're good at what they do.
But the system itself is so absolutely rotten. It just needs complete overhaul.
That's the thing, though. Whenever you criticise it, people automatically assume that you're criticising the NHS staff. We're not doing that. We're criticising the system. And the problem is, if you want to protect the NHS, then we must be free to criticise it. Because if criticism becomes improvement, and with the absence of that, becomes the absence of improvement. And the absence of improvement...
Not one Prime Minister out of the best part of the last 15 years has done anything to make it better. You know,
no one wants it to not be free at the point of entry. Almost, with the exception of America, all around the developed world,
I wonder
it is free
about
at the
that.
point of entry.
I do wonder about that. I think if you took some of it, I mean, some of it is not free at the point of sale anyway, because if you go to the dentist, unless you've got some kind of exemption from it, or you're unemployed, or you're a pregnant mother or a child, you have to pay. You know, if you go for some forms of therapy, you have to pay.
Yeah.
If you pay for a subscription, you're paying for something. It's not free. So, you know, I think they have to get away from this whole idea that, it's free at the point of collection, because it's clearly not working.
But also to get away from the idea that that's unique. In the developed world, with the exception of America, that is not unique at all. But there are so many more efficient ways to have this thing run. And as I say,
always underfunded, but we fund them more every year.
Yeah.
Where is the money
Why are they
going?
underfunded?
We need to stop increasing the funding until we understand where it is going.
Yeah.
They need to, I think, publicise where they're spending this money and why, because I bet you it's going to middle management.
Well, lots
and
of
their
it is not going
teams.
to actual clinical frontline services, and that's what you need to know.
I would love to know what the cost is on patient outcomes when they've fired. They talk about, COVID statistics and that kind of data all the time. I want to know exactly what the chances of increased mortality rates are from firing those unvaccinated members of staff versus having those members of staff in the hospital, despite the fact the vaccine doesn't seem to have much effect on transmission.
No.
With the care system as well, I think it was a report that said about 40% of the excess care home deaths came from patient neglect and loneliness.
Yeah.
So then you're going to go and sack all of these staff, so there's going to be more patient neglect and more loneliness. How many more deaths is that going to cause?
I know.
And I just don't get the point, because these workers at the very forefront of the pandemic, when it was at its worst, were working in those hospitals unvaccinated.
Exactly.
So what has changed?
Suddenly now they have to be fired for it.
And you saw as well what happened to that doctor after he spoke to Sajid Javid honestly, and the whole hubbub around that. There must be so much pressure on because we talk about free speech a lot, that, there must be so much pressure to conform in your opinions and to conform in your behaviour on nurses, doctors, because when anybody comes out and presents a differing view, a view that, I've spoken to, anecdotally to NHS staff, to paramedics who hold the same views as that doctor, there must be so much pressure on them to conform that we don't really even know what the views are of the majority of NHS staff.
Well, we know there's at least 85,000 who are not vaccinated who will all lose their jobs if they don't get vaccinated.
5% of the NHS workforce. But if you think about these doctors, they've studied their entire lives for their jobs, and now they're going to lose it because they don't want a vaccine.
And these don't just become a doctor throughout the pandemic. Whatever happens, clap for carers, clap for them only if they do.
And I mean, the other reason I think,
and
the other reason I think the NHS are planked is that they haven't stood up for these people.
No.
These are people who have worked for them, served their cause, done all sorts of things that they were asked to do in quite difficult circumstances. As soon as the old Department of Health snaps its fingers, the NHS goes, okay. So, your third one.
Well, my third one is Rupert Grint.
Rupert Grint.
He's obviously a Harry Potter star, and he said that he described J.K. Rowling as his auntie. I don't always agree with everything she says. I don't get this. That woman made their entire life.
Exactly. I mean, who'd heard of Rupert Grint?
10 years old.
Right, who'd heard of Rupert Grint?
Another entitled ginger.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. There's two of them in this situation, and I don't count you in that either, because you're not actually on the list of plankery. But it is madness, isn't it?
It's complete madness. And I don't think they need to get involved.
No.
It's nothing to do with them. And at the end of the day, without J.K. Rowling, they would be nobody.
I would accept their point of view, slagging her off and telling her she can't come to any of the things that they wouldn't be doing if it wasn't for her inventing them, right? That they gave all their money back and said, right, every single penny I've ever made from Harry Potter, I'm going to give it to charity, and I'm going to go back to living as a non-entity, which is what I was before J.K. Rowling found out who I was, right?
They were
and then I would listen to them, but not now, while they count their millions.
I don't get why these men as a whole want to dictate how women should be feeling about certain political issues.
Or how women should be defined, even.
Exactly, because at the end of the day...
It's very unfeminist of them.
It really is.
J.K. Rowling has a history, and that is the reason why she has the views that she does. And it is
her views aren't exactly revolutionary, are they?
It's literally, we don't want people who were born men to be in female sports or female spaces, which is entirely reasonable.
Yeah, particularly prisons.
Exactly, because
changing
we've seen... I saw a statistic the other day, and it was about almost 5 times more likely that men imprisoned would be transgender as opposed to the outside general population.
Oh, really?
And there was a story that he went into prison, became a woman, went into a women's prison, raped them, and as soon as he came out, he then went back to male.
Oh, really?
And it's a case of women deserve to be in prisons without having these people, because a lot of those women in prisons have had abuse and things, trauma done by men in their past. They deserve to be in prisons away from biological men, as do sports.
Yeah.
Why should we have people that are born men in our sports? It's got nothing to do with what you want to call yourself, because we have people in my football league that were girls and are now transitioned to boys, and that's not a problem. Why? Because it's an equal playing field. The reality is men are better than us, they are faster than us, they are quicker than us, they are stronger than us. If we played against men, we wouldn't stand a chance. That's why they separate men and women. They don't do it just because we happen to be called women. They happen to be called men.
There are also safety
reasons. They do it so we can
well
stand a
in
chance.
things like
Well,
boxing.
I mean, boxing has been raised before, where if you have somebody who's transgender and formerly a man who's punching a woman effectively, I mean, you can't really sanction that as sport, can you?
In the UFC, there was a former male Marine who then turned into a woman and beat this poor woman to shreds. How is that progressive? They come out here and say that this is all progressive, but what is progressive about any of this complete, utter nonsense? And there's no reason for it, because the transgender community is such a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. There is no reason to completely screw over the majority of women and put them in unsafe situations in order to cater to these small amount of individuals. You can respect how they want to identify, you can respect who they are and respect their lives, but you do not need to compromise the safety and the comfort of the majority for the minority. And that's, for some reason, is the session we have in society, and I don't know why. And
that makes Rupert Grint definitely up there for Plank of the Week.
Yes.
Now, my final one is Sadiq Khan, another guy who's in it quite a lot. We try again, we try not to put him in every week, but, you know, it's not enough, apparently, for Sadiq Khan to completely redesign the street map of London so that nobody can actually go anywhere, you know, because there's a huge bike lane over there. There's some, you know, there's some cycling lights over there. There's a bus lane here, but you can't overtake the bus, you can't overtake the cyclist. You know, the trains are off because they're digging them up, they haven't got any money. He's now decided that it's not enough to have the congestion charge, which is 15 quid. It's not enough to have the ULEZ charge, which is, I think, another 20 quid if you're coming in from outside London. So if you're a working man in a white van that's quite old and it's got a bit of diesel coming out of it, you're paying 40 quid for the privilege of just getting into London before you've earned any money at all. He now says he wants to, by 2024, draw up plans to reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality to the point where basically every journey you take in a car, you have to pay for. So we don't know how much per mile yet, but say, for example, it's £1 a mile. So, you know, if you drive 10 miles, you've got to pay 10 quid. It's unbelievable that they just want to milk and milk and milk the motorists.
Whose life is this improving?
Nobody's.
Whose life?
No
one's, apart from the rich
idea
people.
that, I mean, the reason why he wants to do this is straightforwardly he wants to get cars off of the road. The people that this is going to affect the most are the people who he should be quite concerned about discriminating against, surely.
Yes.
People who, you know, use their vehicles for a trade, people who don't have the luxury of living in bougie areas where everything's like a little village and you've got your butcher, your baker and your candlestick maker. But those people who live in these built-up areas that he encouraged to be built, these big skyscraper areas with no local infrastructure, where the only way you can get to a shop or to a supermarket is to drive there. It's making life more difficult for the people who already have a more difficult life. The idea of this absolutely infuriates me because for some people, their car is their independence. And it's a very, very upper middle class virtue signalling concern to want to take cars off of the road in the name of eco-activism.
They don't have to go anywhere. It's absolutely outrageous.
Politicians should come into people's lives in order to make them better. They are knowingly
making
it worse.
Rather than preaching to them about their, you know...
There is no benefit to this. At the end of the day, China are going to keep doing what they're doing. Russia are going to keep doing what they're doing. India are going to keep doing what they're doing. So why are we going to ruin our people's lives in this country to conform to some utterly useless green
And what
agenda?
is it? Less than 1% is our contribution?
Yeah, less than 1%.
We were in like the top 10 emissions in like pollution. We were like the lowest 10, and we were like the top 10 most environmental countries. What more can we do other than destroy our lives?
It's like a single molecule in the drop in the ocean.
It's like having a big absolutely huge jar of midget gems and taking one out. That's what it's like. Anyway, listen, we've got to get on because we're running out of time. So here's what we do, Sophie. I want you to pick your favourite one of Emma's 3 nominations. So, Emma, why don't you tell Sophie what you had?
The Confectioners as a joint nomination.
The Confectioners I like that.
The NHS and Khalid Mahmood MP.
Oh, well, I think it's between Khalid and the NHS, but I'm going to go with the NHS because I just think that their behaviour is utterly callous and despicable, to be quite honest with you.
I think that's a very good choice. Right, now you tell me your 3. I've got them in front of me.
So mine were obviously Rupert Grint, Beijing Barry and Keir Starmer.
I think it's got to be Beijing Barry this week, hasn't it? Because, I don't think he's been in it.
Every week,
Keir's in there anyway, and I mean, he will figure probably in the top 20 at the end of the year, but Beijing Barry, he's got to be in there for taking all this money. Now, you want to choose mine, Emma? Sadiq Khan, Boris Johnson, Harry and Meghan.
Oh, those are really high level.
They're high. They are. They're all up there.
I think Boris Johnson.
I think so, particularly because of what he just said today, where he's basically now admitting that it was a party. So the first time he said anything was that he was appalled and absolutely it was disgraceful that he discovered there were parties because apparently Allegra Stratton had never told him that. Then he said that he wasn't sure if he was at the party. And he needed to wait until the investigation was complete before he could tell you. Then he remembered that he was at the party for 25 minutes, but it wasn't a party. Today he's saying that nobody told him it was a party or that it was against the rules. So
it's like a kid who's been called into the teacher's office and he's trying to lie his way out.
Here's the timeline, and he keeps trapping himself with each lie. So that every time he then says something else, it lies about what he said before. So it can't all be true.
I think the apologies are actually worse than the actual rule breaking itself. They're so embarrassing.
Maybe he started to believe, and everybody was saying that he was a sort of Teflon Tony character when none of the crap would stick.
Imagine being in a meeting where they said, "Here's a good idea. Let's just announce a load of policies, right? Get every single department in Whitehall to go, right, we're going to do this, guys, and we're going to save Boris." And people are going, that's not actually what we want you to do. We want you to sort out the country. We want you to stop telling lies and stop pretending that we're idiots. That would be a good start.
The point, actually, is that it's shown as well that public health policy has now become a political pawn.
Yes.
Because now we can just change the restrictions in order to save the opinion polls.
We should maybe thank Boris Johnson for now finally revealing that the whole government policy of the last 2 years was a massive sort of game.
I say Boris Johnson should stick around for as long as possible that we can never have another lockdown.
Well, let's decide who the winner is, because now it's time to choose the winner of Plank of the Week. And I'm going to also mention that I'm going to carry over Australia because they were in it last week for what they did to Novak Djokovic, and what they then did this week was even worse. Put him in detention over the course of the weekend, told him that they would have another hearing, then deported him. And as somebody pointed out, he's the first sportsman to be kicked out of a tournament for not taking drugs. So, I mean, it's quite remarkable.
To the women, no one's picked up on this. One of the female tennis players, they strip searched her.
Oh, God.
For what reason?
I'm never going to
Australia.
Didn't have a vaccine. I'm just never going there. That's it. Right, so Barry Gardiner, Boris Johnson, the NHS. Who's number one?
That's so hard.
Who's won it?
That is really hard.
Barry Gardiner,
right? It's got to be Beijing Barry.
I think Beijing Barry's the man, isn't he?
My first one, haven't you?
well done, you.
He's the CCP's man.
He brings the winner to the game. All right, so Barry Gardiner, number one. I think we've got to give Boris number 2.
Yeah, and the NHS number 3.
And the NHS number 3. So well done, Beijing Barry. Nice house, by the way. And thanks very much for employing the Chinese agent's son, even though, of course, he hasn't done anything wrong. Barry Gardiner, Plank of the Week. Thanks to Emma, thanks to Sophie. We'll see you next time.